Hello and welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Today we are joined by Josh Scofield. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Excited about the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited about today. And before we jump into it, could you please share a little bit about your background with everybody?
Yeah, for sure. So my journey to talent acquisition, HR has been an interesting one. I went to the University of Kansas, graduated there actually with a broadcast management degree from the journalism school. And for the first 4 or 5 years of my life, spent on air, mostly sports broadcasting. A lot of small high school, small college stuff in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Moved to the Chicagoland area circa 2005-ish, and had the realization that breaking into that market in the Chicagoland area was a little difficult. So made a professional transition into talent acquisition. Started out in general labor, manufacturing, that space, then got into more professional technical recruitment, IT specific, engineering specific, and pretty much been in that for the vast majority of my career. And then a couple years ago, was fortunate enough to transition internally with an incredibly awesome company here in the Libertyville area by the name of MBX Systems. So that's kind of how I got here.
Very cool. Nice. And for MBX Systems, just so we have a pulse on your point of impact and perspective, where you're coming from. Can you just tell us a little bit about high level solution, size of company, size of talent team, how many recs you're working with on an annual basis, like that type of stuff?
Yeah. So MBX is a fairly rapidly growing technology firm here in Libertyville. Ultimately what we do is design, engineer, and manufacture, technical solutions, hardware, connected devices. We're getting into new verticals, which has been part of the reason for, I would term substantial growth over the last couple of years. We've gone from probably somewhere in the mid hundreds to probably by end of this year, hitting that 200 mark as far as full-time internal folks. Really cool company, working with stuff that's not even out on the market yet as far as the solutions that we create for clients all over the world. As far as the size of the team, I'm kind of the guy. I handle everything. I have somebody that helps me. Our HR coordinator it has been a phenomenal assistant to me. She handles some of the, and I've kind of trained her up on some of the contingent stuff, right, in our warehouse and production. But as far as the rest of the stuff, it's kind of a team of one, as it were. So,
cool.
In a number of recs, yeah. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me for the year, but I mean, we've brought in north of, 50 individuals for the year. Some of that's been net new, some of that's been, backfill, but, on average, I think we've been working on somewhere in the teens, week over week as far as open recs, right? So yeah, it's been a really interesting 22. 23 is looking to be another interesting year for probably different reasons, but we can probably touch on that later if need be.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the organizations I know you said you're passionate about is Autism Speaks. And so I thought we could start on this topic and again really focus on how companies and organizations can help people with autism enter the workforce, and just talk about that process. Where does it start? Does it start on the company side? Does it really start with these organizations that focus on helping people with autism do so? And if we could just kind of walk high level and down into what the process looks like, and how individuals, tying it back to talent acquisition, how people in talent acquisition can help inform companies and get involved to help.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that since I started here at MBX, I've been, pretty passionate about. And, it's largely full transparency because, I have a chip in the game here. My son he's going to be turning 12 next summer. Just turned 11, just transitioned to middle school. He's autistic. He's on the spectrum. High achieving. We just had parent teacher conferences last week, and his math teacher, he's in the, Standard Classroom said it would be an injustice if he was not in my classroom. So, he's doing great. And the educational system, at least for us, right, we're incredibly fortunate, a great school, great situation. So the educational system, I think, is in a much better spot overall as far as being able to, help individuals on the spectrum to, achieve to their potential, right? The gap that I see is, when we're making that transition from the educational system to the professional world, right? So one of the things that I have started doing, and there's a lot more work to do, but one of the things I've started doing is connecting with, resources from Autism Speaks and some of the groups that are connected with them to figure out, where are the pipelines? How do you create pipelines of individuals who may be on the spectrum and are looking to, either transition into the workforce or are maybe in the workforce and are looking for new opportunities, so on and so forth. So, I think as far as the due diligence that I've done so far, I think the first really key important part is, providing that, education and, understanding, right? Because, while groups like Autism Speaks have done a great job raising awareness of what autism is and, trying to, raise funds to do all the great research that they do, I think that there's still a lot of awareness internally within, organizations that, we as talent acquisition people and, ultimately HR teams can be really impactful with. But I think that's kind of where it starts, right? Providing those, learning opportunities for, internal stakeholders because the reality is a lot probably don't understand what it is, maybe have heard of it, but, if there's not an understanding, then there's going to be maybe some, aversion to, that personality type, skill set, so on and so forth, right? So I think education is the first real key piece. Once, a person, tackles that and you start to get buy-in, that's the next piece that, I have found to be somewhat challenging so far. And, unfortunately, 22 has been an incredibly busy year for us, a great year for us, and I haven't had quite as much time as I would like to, put into this. But, that's kind of where I see the gap. After you get the buy-in, then what, right? These groups do a great job when, the kids are in the educational system, but after, and I think in part it kind of goes to, one of the other topics, staffing, shortages, the talent market out there. I don't know if they have the resources right on this side of the coin. So, the first key step in my viewpoint is, getting that education out there to your teams to get the buy-in on, hey, this is a, significant talent pool that is dramatically underutilized. I think the last statistics that I saw, 80 to 90% of individuals on the spectrum were either unemployed or underemployed. So, that's a significant pool of talent out there that's either under or not utilized at all. So, I think getting that training out there and getting that awareness, right, to then be able to come up with strategies internally to be able to, weave them into, your environment, your culture, I think is the first key step.
For sure. And so it sounds like the biggest gap is just in terms of how to help individuals enter the workforce. So for instance, with Autism Speaks, is that part of what they do? Like, are they actually doing kind of outreach to companies explaining like, hey, we have a talent pool here that is, particularly good at XYZ. Like, do you have room within your organization? Or do you see this being something that you'd be interested in? I mean, are they doing that outreach specifically, or are you aware of other organizations that might be doing that?
Yeah. So all of the outreach that has occurred has been more on my side, outreaching to them, right? And I don't think
Yeah.
that that's because there's not the effort on their side, right? I think it's more a situation of resources, right?
Yeah.
I think in the field that I get is, their resources in this particular area is pretty stretched. The folks that I have come into contact with, and we've kind of worked through, okay, we have this training available. We can roll this out to your teams and provide the training. I mean, that's great, right? I think it's more, because I've done all the outreach trying to figure out, okay, what is available, what can we, incorporate, how can we make some of these initial steps work. It's mostly been things that I've kind of taken myself, right?
Sure.
So yeah, they may be, they may be doing some outreach here and there to companies. We're in the grand scheme of things, a smaller company, when you start looking at, bigger players like, an Apple, a Microsoft, so on and so forth. So maybe there is more outreach to, larger organizations, but, most of what I have done has been, outreaching to them specifically to, at least start to get some of these building blocks in place, right?
Yeah, for sure. And there's one organization you should check out, Pathways for Autism.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of my friends, Alex Buckles, is the founder CEO of the organization. He actually has another SaaS company that he's currently scaling.
Yeah.
But I think he has a similar story to yours. And his focus is really on the workforce element, just like you mentioned, right? So I think what the ultimate goal of the company, and I don't know all the specifics, but basically it's connecting companies with folks that do have autism, and specifically matching them up for jobs, and managing, I think, a lot of that process. So I think, from what I understand, people on the spectrum would actually be employed by Pathways for Autism and then plugged into a lot of different projects at employers. So I think some of the and I could be wrong, but I think some of, like, the management and oversight, it actually happens from for Autism. It happens within that group, and then essentially, like, they're putting together. They hear the project requirements from the company, and then they're implementing the solution with the people employed by them.
Yep.
Because I think he mentioned, like, a very similar issue. It's like, you have individuals that are very high achieving, that have a really great skill set that they can bring to the table and add significant value, but organizations maybe just aren't educated on how to help these individuals thrive. And
Yep.
so that's why you need more solutions on the market, because there is a huge labor force, essentially, that can be, very valuable to companies that most companies are missing out on right now, from what I can tell,
Yep.
from what you share with me and what Alex shared with me as well.
Yep. Yeah, that statistic, it just continues to reverberate in my brain, right? As a dad, right? And as
Yeah.
a, talent acquisition manager on both sides. I mean, obviously I want my son to be able to, live a healthy, happy and fulfilling life. But on the other hand, I can see, this gap, right? Being able to, be something that would help bridge some of our, talent shortage gaps, right? So I think it's a win-win. It's just, how do we get from where we are today to making that more of a, functional, feasible thing down the road, right?
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And I also, while we still have time in the podcast, I want to just talk through, there's still, despite even current market conditions, which are, I think, easing up a little bit when it comes to hiring, there still is definitely what's perceived as a skill gap, and in some cases a labor drought, in which companies are not able to really find the talent that's going to move them forward. Um, what do you think is going on there? I think, for instance, I think it's a couple of things. I think, for sure, there are cases in which it's hard to find qualified talent. I think also there's a lot of broken process within companies that makes it difficult for them to recruit. So I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on the topic, and what your thoughts on what, companies can be doing to consistently ensure that they can fill open roles, and particularly in, positions where, for instance, like engineering, or top salespeople, roles that companies need to scale. right, and hire for in a large quantity, what can they really be doing to ensure that they're better positioned than their competitors out there?
Yep. So it's been an interesting, last couple of years, right? I've been through the 08, 09 situation, but this is, obviously much different than that. What I've seen lately, I agree, it's been opening up a little bit, right? When you start looking at your, 0 to 4, 0 to 5 year, skill set, I think those, have been opening a bit, even with more of your mid and some senior level, type, backgrounds. I feel like there's been more conversations, over the last probably 3 to 6 months than prior maybe. So I think the market is opening up a little bit. But one of the things that's interesting to me, I've sat in on a couple of these, conversations. The most recent one I sat in on, it was given by Ron Hetrick. He's a labor economist. I think he worked for a couple different, presidential committees. He was with the BLS for quite some time. And what he really focused in on, well, it was a couple fold. One, not only the near term shortage, right, but more the long term, shortage. And the thing that he gave out was like, the baby boomers, huge generation, they're retiring out. So, inherently right now, there's a pretty big gap, right, with labor needed and labor available, right? The other thing he looked at was, birth rates, right? So what does that mean? For today, not much, but 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, it could be significant. Birth rates are going down. So if there's a shortage of human beings in the market right now, theoretically, by his numbers, there's going to be less in the future, right? So, I from what I've seen from the data that I've been looking at, I don't think that, this is going to be any less impactful as we move forward, right? So, ways to, solve that problem, right? He mentioned that people are looking at automation and robotics to solve some of these things. Well, I don't know if that's really a solution either, because, in order to automate a process, you have to have people to automate the process, or put robotics in, you have to have people to, design the robotics. So, how, not only in the near term, but, in the future, how do we start looking at ways to kind of bridge these gaps, right? So for us, one of the things, and when you look at like engineering skill or, senior level technical skills, I think one important thing is to be able to look at somebody and look at experience they have and potential, right? So being able to train up, right? Upskill, reskill, I think that's incredibly important, because I think, when you start looking at, okay, you have to have an engineer, right? Well, there's a pool of engineers out there. Well, I have to have this engineer do X, Y, and Z, right? Well, I have to have this person also know this technology, right? So you keep shrinking your pool. But if you're able to maybe train up on some of these things in short order, that, opens that back up and gives you more potential to look at, right? So I think upskilling, reskilling is important, internally, as well as, candidates may be looking at externally, bringing people in that, have potential and you feel that can provide value, and you can maybe provide some training and ability for them to ramp up in X amount of time, right?
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I just wanted to slow down on that. So like historically, I have had a lot of trouble hiring for potential.
Yeah.
It's just like really difficult. And I haven't seen a ton of success on like personality tests and like
Yeah.
these different like soft skill type of tests. No, like I know a couple of companies that have been successful with it. I think they have really, really great like onboarding and training programs. And I think also it really does need to be for a position that you're hiring for at scale. That way, if some individuals don't work out, like you're not totally reliant on that pool. So,
Sure.
if you can find some type of metric like, okay, we're going to hire for potential, but we can't hire for track record. Um, to some extent, you need to, I don't know, is it that we have to just accept that maybe a lower percentage of folks are going to work out if we're hiring for potential? What do you think about that? I mean, that's just stuff that goes through my head.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a potential eventuality, right? Because, I don't know about your experience, but my experience is, hiring is a very inexact science anyway, right? I mean, even
Yeah.
if you find somebody that checks every box, you find somebody that on the front end, that cultural alignment is spot on, you still can't guarantee 30 days out, 60 days out, 90 days out, right? I mean, there's just, you know, there's too much gray area there, right? So I think sure, with hiring on potential, you're going to have to be prepared for that potential not coming to fruition. But I don't know if it's a whole lot different than anything else, really.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. I think maybe the difference then is maybe not even. I would love to see data on like success rate. I really wish I had
Sure,
that data. That would be such a amazing stat to look at. Like somehow, I mean, I don't really like to measure quality of hire because it's difficult to quantify, but some kind of like success within role of individuals that are coming from, years and years of experience from that background versus people that are you're really focused on onboarding and training, that are kind of pushing up. I think it obviously depends on the role. I don't know. I kind of go back and forth. Like, okay, on an IC level, I can see a lot more training, hiring potential. And then for some more strategic high level roles, maybe you really just need somebody who's been there, done that.
sure.
So there's different aspects like that. But then again, like one of the most successful GMs, like CROs that I know, literally started off as a salesperson and worked her way up as like GM of North America for a publicly traded SaaS company. Like, so it's just like it's so interesting. But then how do you call that shot? Like, and it's incrementally over a period of years, and I guess you just keep slowly moving somebody up. But I feel like it's really hard to predict whether or not somebody's going to be able to continue to take that next step. um Very, very difficult. So it's hard to put together like a definite strategy of like, all right, we're going to promote from within. Or I think it's maybe it's just being open to it, but you have to have like a very critical process in place to ensure that you're only moving up people that are ready to level up,
Right.
and can handle that next. And so then it just becomes, I think somebody very senior at the top needs to know how to do that very well and needs to understand what success is going to look like in that next role. And hey, if we have somebody moving into their role for the first time, how much are they invested in self-learning? And then also, do we have the right advisors and people in place to ensure that they can bridge the gap if there's like certain types of reporting they're going to need to do, or whatever skill set they're going to need, how much are they able to develop it in their current role, and then how do we eliminate blind spots by providing other resources for them? And that's where it gets really difficult, I think. And it
Yeah.
takes a lot of time. Like, but then
It takes
again,
a
it
lot of
takes a lot of
time.
time if you hire the wrong person externally and they screw up and they're there for 6 to 9 months, then you have to let them go. So
Yep.
either way, you have to invest a ton of time. So maybe if it's a known resource you trust, and maybe it makes sense to focus on how do we eliminate blind spots versus hiring the unknown quantity that might have the experience. As you said, they might check all the boxes, but they might fall flat on their face regardless. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
completely. And I think having, and you mentioned this too, having the resources available, right? I think that's incredibly important. Being able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Being able to know who your high potential, individuals are, right? Communication is incredibly important, across the range, between managers, HR, leadership, all these things, play, I think, a really important part in the whole thing. But yeah, it's all important pieces of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, and I also think it's a little bit easier to identify high potential individuals once they've already worked for you
Yeah,
versus like external, right? I can look at somebody who's producing really well in an IC role, individual contributor role, and say, okay, look, I think they'd be ready for a team lead or management. I've also fallen in the trap of promoting an individual contributor to a manager, and they were good at the IC work, but then they are not wired correctly for a management role. So you can make
yep,
there's so many ways to make mistakes. It's so frustrating, but
right.
still, I think it's like identifying high potential is like a little bit easier with somebody that's been with the company a year or two versus hiring external for potential.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's the toughest. Like when our clients, so what my company does is we worked with 150 startups, growth stage companies to help them hire engineers, salespeople, all that kind of stuff, and we do it through like a embedded recruiting model, a subscription, right?
sure.
And the role, like I'd rather get a search for like a very specific VP level role than them just saying like, hey, I want you to hire somebody for potential that doesn't have like a specific skill set. I'm like, oh my God.
Yep.
Because it's just like, as a recruiter, I'm just like, okay, I don't, I can't necessarily control onboarding, right? I can't necessarily control the seniority of the hiring manager
Yep.
that we're recruiting for.
Sure.
And, as talent acquisition, how can I do my part to ensure that we're getting the best person in the seat and that they're going to have the resources available to them? And so what I end up doing is trying to like push back and say, okay, walk me through onboarding process. Walk me through enablement. What kind of resources do you have available? And trying to push back on that a little bit to ensure, okay, do we have the right things in place to ensure that somebody can come in without all of this experience and actually thrive? Or those are the things you have to look at, right?
Yeah, for sure. And with that, right? So onboarding, training, and all those things play a pretty critical role, I think, with long-term success, right? So yeah, no, I mean, it's very much an inexact science, right? It's more an art than a science, but yeah, completely agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, I totally agree. And look, man, we're coming up on time here. I have an introduction I want to make to you right after this call. Again, to Alex, my buddy Alex, who started Pathways for Autism. So I think it could make sense. I'll send you his LinkedIn profile.
That would
And
be awesome.
yeah, and for everybody tuning in, Pathways for Autism, make sure to check it out. And then the organization you're involved with is Autism Speaks, right?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, before we jump off today, if people want to engage with you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Josh Scofield, and you can always reach me here at the office, josh.scofield@mbx.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you.
Hey, thanks for the time, James.
For sure. And for everybody else tuning in, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Take care.